So Kate and Caroline both talked a lot about Reddit, Tumblr, 4chan, a number of other services. And the question really is, why is this content getting created on these services? And if you're trying to build a service, how can you build it in a way in which content's going to get created on it? So I'm going to talk about how to hack engagement. So essentially, if you're building a web service, you're going to want people to create content on it. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but I think that we have a number of steps that these services that you've been hearing about today and other services in the future can take advantage of to get that content engine going. So the first thing I want to point out is that this is really intimidating. When somebody looks at this, they don't know what to do. And there's a reason that memes don't get created on WordPress, because it's too hard. So how do you leverage user psychology to get content created? Well, here's how you do it. This is a device made in China. Just like Minority Report sort of showed the future of interface design, I think Clockwork Orange showed the future of content creation. That's a joke. But somebody told me that 9 is a really important number in Scandinavian culture, so I'm going to give you a 9-step process for building a service to generate content. And it's going to be in 3 sections. The first section is about getting started. The second section is going to be about getting people to come back after they've created their first post. And the final section is going to be about getting big, going viral, doing this in a sustainable way. So, section 1. And here you have a cute cat picture. So the first thing I want to talk about is please ask nicely. So it turns out that users are pretty friendly. So the best way and the simplest way to get users to create content is simply to ask them to do it. And oftentimes, if you ask a user to do something, if it's simple enough, they'll do it about 80% of the time. But the key thing is to make it really simple and really easy. And the reason why that works is that it takes advantage of a psychological bias that we have called unit bias. And unit bias plays a huge role in eating, and specifically overeating. So people have an innate desire to complete things. Completion is intrinsically rewarding. And so when we complete a complex task, or even when we finish a plate of food, our brains release endorphins, and that makes us feel good. And so classical conditioning leads to a state of affairs where just making progress along a task makes us feel good. So we like completing things, and we hate not completing things. That's why people, always finish their bowl of food. And there's been some really interesting neuroscience studies where they'll put a hidden tube into a bowl of soup, and they'll surreptitiously refill it as the person's eating it. And it turns out that people basically don't stop eating the soup. They just keep going and going until you stop refilling it. Because we like to complete tasks. And I'm going to talk more about how you can leverage this bias to get people to create content. The next thing in getting started is you need to let people express themselves. So we also have an innate desire to express ourselves, but it helps to have a character through which we can express ourselves. And services can help us develop this character. I think Tumblr, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is a really good example of tying identity on the web to content type, which is almost like going into a character, becoming a character, like Borat. So the first thing is, if you're building a service, the first thing to try is to ask people to create content. But you want to make it really easy. You want to give people slam dunks that they can do. So how do you do that? Well, one of the ways to do that is to use a progress bar. And this is a screenshot from LinkedIn. So if anybody has a LinkedIn profile, you'll probably notice that on the right side of your profile, you have this progress bar. And this is what's called a game-like mechanic. So you've heard a lot about game mechanics, I'm sure, which are design patterns taken from video games that are explicitly gamey. So leaderboards, points, et cetera. All those things which are used in services like Foursquare and elsewhere are very effective at getting users to do things, but they're also very effective in making people feel like they're playing a game. And when you're playing a game and you're not looking to be playing a game, it can sort of feel a little manipulative. So what LinkedIn has done is they've leveraged the progress bar, which comes from video games. And they've used it to get people to do something that's really valuable to the service, which is fill out all this information, which then helps LinkedIn make money by essentially selling your data to recruiters. So they give you specific statistics for what each step of this is going to do. And the result is that people fill it out because people want to get to 100%, and they've clearly identified how to do each of these things. Lots of other sites use this as well. OkCupid is a good example of that too. But thinking about how to use game-like mechanics like progress bars is a really effective way to kickstart content creation, specifically around the onboarding process of a website. So getting back to Expression and Tumblr, you want to make it really, really easy for people. So what you want to do is you want to think about what the atomic unit of content that your service relies on is, and then you want to make it very easy for people to express themselves through that. So it's often talked about how easy Tumblr is to use, but I don't think it's easy in the way that most people think it is. It's not that the post mechanism itself really looks that much similar to WordPress, because when you click into this text box, it essentially looks exactly the same as the WordPress text box. But what they've done with Tumblr is give us prompts. And prompts are really important, because if you just tell somebody to post about something, they're not going to know what to do. What Tumblr does is all the time you're looking at your dashboard and they're giving you 7 different ideas for what you could post about. You could post text, you could post photo, video, a quote. And having a prompt like that, and this is sort of a very basic version of a prompt, but prompts in general are really effective tools for getting users to create content. We'll go more into that in a little bit. So section 2 is about doing it again. So you don't just want users to post once and then never come back. You really want to build engagement. And that's the important thing to building a big service. So the first way to do that is to understand that we're a little bit like dogs in that we really like to be pet. So figure out how to implement tools into your service that let people get pet and that let you pet other people, and that's really important. The second thing that's important to build in is status, because everybody sort of wants to feel like they're the king. So that's really important. And ego metrics are essentially indicators of status in online services. And the final thing is to give people treats or candy bars, because everybody likes a Baby Ruth. So let's talk about petting, right? So this is a screenshot from Yelp. And at the bottom of every Yelp review, you'll see these 3 buttons. And you can say, was this review useful, funny, cool? It seems a little bit mundane, but having these buttons on the reviews is what makes that reviewer come back and write a review again, right? Because nobody wants to feel like they're talking into an empty room. And these buttons essentially allow the readers to say, hey, I'm listening. Because what you have to remember is that unless you're in a Google Hangout, you're not getting that normal social feedback that you would get in a conversation with people. And the way that we're hardwired, the way that we've developed, is to crave that social feedback. So when people are on another side of a screen and you're talking by posting something, you need to know that people are essentially nodding their head. So buttons like this, little pets, are essentially a way to let readers tell the poster that they've been listening. In terms of status, ego metrics like follower counts are really, really important, right? So you look at Justin Bieber, 27 million followers right now. That's an ego metric. That tells me when I look at his profile that he's really fucking important. And that must make him feel really good, and anecdotally, given what I've heard about how arrogant he is, I think it's working. Now let's talk about digital candy bars. And I think Foursquare is probably the best known example of this. But badges are an example of digital candy bars. You give people these sort of random rewards or treats, and they don't have much nutritional value, but they make you kind of happy to get them. Now let's talk about getting big. So I talked a little bit about an atomic unit of content, but let me explain a little bit more about what an atomic unit of content is. So on Twitter, the atomic unit of content is the tweet. On Tumblr, it's the post. On Instagram, it's the photo. And the reason I've used this image is that you want to pick an atomic unit of content that happens very frequently and is connected to a real-world behavior or trigger. And so it should just be like clockwork. It's like you're punching in your time card when you go to work. That's what your atomic unit of content should be. And this image is essentially Foursquare. Part of Foursquare's genius is that their atomic unit of content is so easy to understand. Everybody knows the exact right time to use Foursquare to check into someplace, because it's every time you enter a new business, that's the time that you check in. And understanding that and trying to build your own atomic unit of content and connecting it to a real-world behavior, but a real-world behavior that happens with regularity is really important. So the number one piece of feedback that I give to new entrepreneurs who are trying to start services is how often is the kind of content that you want people to produce happening? If it's only happening a couple times a month, that's not going to be enough to build a successful service. But if you think about Foursquare or Twitter or any of these other services, there's a lot of opportunities to create content on them, and they're tied to very specific triggers. So this is an image of freegans who are dumpster diving, and the reason that I put this in is that one person's trash is another person's treasure. And the way that to think about that on a web service is that what's a comment for one person is content for another. And if you think about services that involve reposting of some sort, like Twitter, like Pinterest, like Tumblr, the act of saving or storing something for later or putting it onto my own online presence is also a way of giving feedback to another user, and that starts a very virtuous cycle of content creation that's really valuable. The third thing that I want to talk about here is giving people a sense of ownership over what they create. And this is a screenshot of a GeoCities webpage that this person has exerted a lot of ownership over, and that's going to be really important. So Foursquare, again, tied to very specific triggers for behavior, a very small atomic unit of content that is readily understandable. Pinterest, you want people to be able to create content that is also contributing feedback to other users, and that creates a really good cycle. And then instead of GeoCities, you want to let people exert ownership in more constrained forms. So Tumblr's theme gallery is a good way to do this, because if everybody's Tumblr looked the same, you wouldn't feel much ownership over it. You wouldn't really want to promote it. But just being able to customize the look really makes it feel like your own. You don't want people to get nuts, because then you end up with GeoCities. So you do a really nice theme gallery like this. So those are the 9 steps for content creation. Now I want to talk about something that we did at Wander pre-launch to try to integrate all these lessons into a unified experience. So we had done a viral launch campaign where we did a leaderboard, so classic example of a game mechanic. It worked incredibly well. We got covered by Wired, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, et cetera. And we hadn't told anybody a single thing about what we did. So people were signing up for this in the thousands and tens of thousands without knowing anything about what we did. So then we were left with a huge list of registered users for a service. And we said, we want them to start creating content, but we don't want to quite let them into the service now. So what we did is we came up with something that we called Wander Weeks. And we described this as a 4-week orientation process to Wander. So if you go back to game-like mechanics, essentially what we were using was an in-game tutorial. So it's the practice level where you learn to run and jump and swing your sword and what all the different buttons do. We wanted to do that for Wander to get people acclimated to the service, to continue to generate some hype and buzz, but also to kickstart content generation. Because the number one problem that a lot of services face is what's known as the empty restaurant problem, which is when you get into a service and there's no content there, and it looks pretty boring. But that's a chicken and egg problem, right? So we took all the lessons that I've described and we rolled them up into Wander Weeks. And Wander Weeks started by each week, we would send all of our registered users an email and ask them a different question. then they would click on a link and come to this page. So this represents the landing page of each of the 4 weeks. So we asked 4 different questions, 1 a week for 4 weeks. The first was this aspirational question, tell us where you'd rather be. The second was a nostalgic question, share a memory from a place you've been. The third was a recommendation question, so where do you recommend? And the fourth was a real-time question, essentially, where does everybody know your name? And we decided that these were sort of the 4 chief content types on Wander, that all content in the future was going to follow one of these 4 examples. So we created this page, we sent an email to all our users, and they would come and just start creating content. And the content that they made was, at times, extremely moving. So you have a person talking about their grandmother in Guangzhou, or when they, pledged to go back and build a school in Tanzania. And people really, there was some amazing content created. But if you think about what we did here, we made it really easy. This is almost like Mad Libs, right? It's fill in the blanks. And fill in the blanks is really easy to do. So you want to set up these layups for users. You want to make it almost as easy as filling in the blanks, because everybody can do that. And if you combine fill in the blanks, right, and you combine that with something that's expressive, then you can really get people to share a lot. But we went a step further. So after you created your first post, we put up this pop-up which said, nice post, now spread the love and heart somebody else's, right? So about 80% of people who posted then went on and liked somebody else's. Now, if we had said, now go like 10 other people's posts, the result would have been people liked 0, right? Because think back to completion bias. We love completing tasks, but we hate not completing tasks. So you're seeing 9 posts here, very likely that the user already sees a post that they like right here. So they know that they can complete that task, and that's going to feel good. Classical conditioning, they're going to get that endorphin release. If you say like 10, they're going to get a little anxious. They're not sure if they're going to find 10 that they're going to like. They don't know how long that's going to take. So they're just not going to complete the task at all, because they don't want to start something that they can't finish. So 80% of users liked 1 post. But of course, as a service, we wanted people to like a lot more than 1 post. So what we did is we gave people little candy bars. And the best time to give people candy bars, or the best way to do it, is in a way that they don't know to expect. So it's purely a surprise. So look at the little deer here. After you liked 1 post, we started growing this tree. And it was very subtle, right? And we didn't tell anybody that the tree was going to start growing. And then people would kind of wonder, did that just happen because I clicked that, or was that already there? They weren't sure, so they clicked another post, and then the tree grew a little more. So now they're pretty certain that the tree is growing, but they click it again just to be sure. And now they're already 3 steps in, so they really want to finish the process, so they keep clicking, and you get here, right? And then we cut people off, because I think an important thing to understand is that this experience was very limited. So we realized that if people spent an hour on this, they were actually going to be dissatisfied, because there wasn't really enough to do. This was just pre-launch. So after 5, we did another pop-up and said, you're done. Come back next week. We'll have a new question. And you could restart it if you wanted, but we actually said the word start again, so that people understood the experience was over, that was finished, that's what it was supposed to be. And if you wanted to do more, you could, but it wasn't designed for that. So this, I think, was our attempt to take all those lessons I described before, build them into an integrated product, and we got tens of thousands of posts as a result of this. And the ratio, it was basically, on average, every user created at least 1 post. Of course, that was because some users created many more, and some people didn't even open the email. But hopefully this has been sort of helpful in thinking about how to build services and how to design them to hack engagement to get people to create content. So thank you. If anybody has any tips for Malmo or Copenhagen, or wants to show me around, email me.